Hi everyone, welcome to Potluck Food Talks. Today we have a very special guest, Jovel Chan. She's a gastronomic communicator and producer. I would summarize that like that.
Okay.
How are you? Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be talking to you today, actually, all the way in Spain, and I'm in Vietnam. This is awesome.
So first I wanted to go a little bit into your background. I know you have a hospitality background and you're from Singapore, and after a few international experience, you ended up becoming kind of like a Vietnam food ambassador or something like that. How did that happen?
That's really, really kind. But yeah, that was some really good stalking. I'm not going to lie, Eric. That was really good stalking. I like that a lot. I'm kidding. Yeah, I'm Singaporean. I study hotel management and also culinary in Switzerland. Ha ha ha. And I worked in various restaurants and hotels doing marketing and doing food writing in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Malaysia, Singapore. And, during the pandemic, I was working for an airline. I was working in Malaysia for an airline. We were doing food for the planes. And because of the pandemic, I, had to find another job. And then I decided, hey, you know what? Let's go to Vietnam. Because during that time, Vietnam was still open. It wasn't locked down. And when I was working, at the airline, I could see that there was so much demand from Vietnam. There were so many cities that were opening up plane routes and stuff like that. So I said, hey, this country is really vibrant and let's go there. So I moved to Vietnam, and then after 3 months of moving there, the country locked down.
So you got trapped in Vietnam.
Yes.
So it's like a Stockholm syndrome. That's how your love began.
I think so. You can actually describe it as a Stockholm syndrome. I just came from one lockdown to another lockdown. But yeah, I arrived in Vietnam when I was locked down. So all of a sudden, I was just stuck in my apartment, and then I started a blog really because the whole country was locked down and there was no way to find out where to get food. So I actually started as a directory because it was so hard to find out where to get food during the lockdown. Basic needs, where to get coffee, where to get chocolate, where to get water, where to get fruit. Those were the first articles. So if you Google Vietnam delivery food, my article will be right there, and you can see the COVID articles from 2021. And that's kind of where it all started. But through connecting and finding out and learning about the restaurant dining scene within my apartment, I got to know so many chefs and restaurant owners and people who were making coffee, and, just naturally being curious, talking to them, develop this, love for the country.
So you mentioned two things that make me really curious. So first of all, I've been a huge fan of Vietnamese cuisine ever since I lived in Berlin. There is a huge Vietnamese community.
Yes.
Because there was a big migration after the Vietnam War, and
yes,
during that time,
exactly,
the Berlinian government took a lot of refugees. So there are whole neighborhoods of Vietnamese. I don't think if there is something like that anywhere else in Europe, but actually I grew up eating a lot of Chinese food in Venezuela, and I still think I've had the best Chinese restaurants in Venezuela. And so I really crave for Asian food, and for some reason, usually Asian restaurants in Europe, most of them are crap. It's very hard to find good ones because most of the times these are people that are not chefs, or they don't have a hospitality background. And they open a restaurant just for whatever reason. That you get to see that a lot. So these are just pre-made things.
Interesting.
But with the Vietnamese, this was different. This was actually comfort, home food. And so I would go a lot to these restaurants. And whenever it makes sense to visit a Vietnamese restaurant, for instance, in Paris, there was also a very good one. And just recently, I went for the first time to Asia. And it's where I had, for sure, the two best experiences in Vietnamese restaurants. I was in Singapore, and also in Kuala Lumpur. And, these were not fancy restaurants at all. One of them was Miss Saigon in Singapore and Dao Sam or Now Sam, something like that, in Kuala Lumpur. I
Yeah.
had the best pho in my life. It was incredible. So, and what I wanted to ask you is, I know like a lot of dishes, sauces. I could even talk about like a flavor profile or spectrum that I know from what I've eaten abroad, but I don't know anything like zero about relevant Vietnamese chefs or the dining scene, which is precisely your expertise, right?
Uh-huh.
So if you could give me like a quick, I don't know, like overlook of what's going on in the Vietnamese restaurant scene, what are the changes, who are like the key players, that would be super essential. But also the street food. I remember for me, it was really interesting, the episode of Anthony Bourdain visiting Vietnam. And I guess that also made an impact on my perception of the country because he travels, there are videos. And there was like this lunch lady that he already back then was saying that she was already like a celebrity that you would find on Google. Does she still exist? Is it still a thing? Does
she still exists.
Into restaurants? Okay.
No, she's still she's become very, very famous and popular, of course, but she's still there. She's not like, it's not like 5 times the price, but she's still there.
And what about restaurants and chefs? Like, I'm talking about mostly like Vietnamese cuisine, because also, what is Vietnamese cuisine? I mean, it's been a country that has to do with China, France, their own local identity, different ethnies. So,
yeah.
What about that?
Vietnam has been occupied by so many people, right? So you have the Chinese, like what you said, that came in. And of course, you have the French who also came in. And then you also have like the Americans that were also here for a really long time. So a lot of people have kind of like been around in Vietnam, and it very much influenced a lot of its cuisine, right? Like in Southeast Asia, Vietnam might probably be the only country that eats bread as a staple, like baguette.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like, who else in Southeast Asia has a national dish which is bread? we eat rice in Asia, right? It's all about your rice dish and stuff like that. But Vietnam is the only one that for breakfast they'll eat, something called banh, which is like a sizzling beef with fresh baguettes, and then you have banh mi. So you can see that the cuisine itself is already quite different from Southeast Asia, right? Like Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, kind of you see a little bit of that similarity, a lot of wok frying and stuff, but not so much in Vietnam. It's a lot healthier, right? Because it's very known for the soups. Like you've got your phở, your bún riêu, and your hủ tiaus and all these things, because it's such a different country that uses a lot of fresh vegetables and herbs. So when I think of Vietnam, if I don't have like a big plate of vegetables somewhere, it doesn't, I don't feel like it's Vietnamese cuisine, right? If there's not enough like vegetables or herbs and spices that really just taste very natural, something just feels missing for me.
Yeah, I feel the same. Like if I would have to describe it, I would say like, yes, a rice, maybe in like a sticky texture that you will find like in the rolls or the noodles. And also lots of fresh vegetables and herbs, like crispy aromatic vegetable component.
There's always still vegetables somewhere, right? Either inside or you're wrapping like a lettuce leaf somewhere or, a rice pepper. Like there's always vegetables and it's always fresh. It's not like deep fried. It's not like a deep fried dish. Everything is almost like so clean and fresh. And the palate I think Vietnamese food is very light. So, sauces are always on the side. It's always a dip. It's a dipping food culture. Even for noodles, it's like, okay, you can just add what you want a little bit. There's no like dish that I feel comes with a sauce at the bottom where you mix it. It's such a flexible cuisine. You can add a little bit of noodle and add a little bit of this, and you add your own vegetables and you add your own sauces. It's such a, like almost like a cuisine that's so rooted in just fresh ingredients. That's how I feel. It's very fresh. It's very light. It's clean. It's very flexible. Yeah.
You mentioned like the right way to pronounce this is pho, the soup?
Pho.
Pho.
Yeah.
Okay. I always say it like pho. Okay, pho.
Yeah. Pho.
So what I've read is that it comes from the north, and it responded at some point, like a long time ago, to the French demand of having beef. So street vendors started like developing a soup with beef instead of pork, which was more dominant at the moment. But yeah, what about the soup? For me, it's like one of the most iconic elements of Vietnamese food. What's your favorite place to go to have one, and why?
So pho is one of those things that I think the origin, they say that it comes straight from the north, right? And, the dish pho comes from pot au pho, which is the French dish.
No way. Okay.
Yeah. Pot au pho, which is the French dish, which is what you're talking about. But if you think about it, how you cook pho, 18 hours with all the beef bones and, the spices and everything, that's very Chinese.
Yeah. I mean, the concept of a noodle soup itself is Chinese.
Yeah, exactly. The whole concept of, taking the bones and, like cooking it and simmering for like 18, 24 hours. That's quite a Chinese-y kind of like way of cooking. Like what in Europe, sure, you have soups, but it's not done in the same way.
Not
the
at
soups
all.
in Europe,
No.
it's not like that, right? It's more of a thickening, the texture. So, who knows about the origins of pho? So I don't want to say anything. And also when you eat it in the north, it's so different from the south, and different parts of Vietnam eat pho differently. There's also stir-fried pho. There's deep-fried pho. So in different parts, and there's dry pho, but not a lot of people know about it. A lot of people know about pho as one type of soup.
As a noodle soup. Yeah. Same with me.
Exactly. Everybody knows it as a noodle soup, but it's very different across different parts of Vietnam. Vietnam's huge, right? And the one that everybody knows actually comes from the south.
The famous noodle soup that you will find abroad.
The one that everybody thinks of pho comes from Saigon, like Ho Chi Minh City.
Okay.
It's not though. So if you go to Hanoi and you eat pho, you almost won't really recognize it as what you think.
Okay, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I've had experiences before of going to the real country and realizing everything I had so far was fake. Like, for instance, I went to Israel recently, and I went to this Lebanese restaurant where I had hummus, and I was like, okay, this has nothing to do with my conception of hummus, and this is like the real place, this is where it comes from.
Yeah.
Do you have like a favorite one, like a favorite spot to have a pho?
My favorite place. Okay, so I prefer the northern pho instead of the southern pho. So in Saigon, I have a few places that I go for pho, but I don't think it's like the best pho because I think all of them are like they're like all pretty good to me personally, and I go to one down the street from where I live, and I can't remember the name of it. I just kind of like always just know what it is. Like, sometimes street food stalls, you don't really know what the names of them are. You just got to know what street number they're on, and then that's it. Sometimes it's just the stand as well. That's the thing, right? They have no names. But street food for me, if I'm in the north, I only eat the street food. But in the south, I'm a little bit more, inclined to eat other kinds of things. Personally, That's my personal preference.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So what about the Michelin Guide? I know it was also not so long ago introduced in Vietnam, or
2023.
Just super recently. Okay. And how has it been the impact of that? Are there like fine dining Vietnamese places? How are they? Who are the chefs? What can you tell us about that?
I would say in the past 3 to 5 years, the modern Vietnamese fine dining scene has really picked up, right? And I don't mean your hotel restaurants, but I really mean like independent Vietnamese chefs who are doing modern Vietnamese cuisine. That really came about, I would say, in the last 3-4 years. I've been writing a new restaurant guide every month for the past almost 1.5 to 2 years. And the one that I see the one category of restaurant that keeps opening as new Vietnamese.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like Vietnamese food, but like elevated in some sorts or more modern versions, or you can now get tasting menus of Vietnamese cuisine. And what the Michelin Guide did, right, when it came in last year and it announced the winners, there are 4 restaurants that got the Michelin star, 1 star. We only have 1 star for now. And 3 of the 4 are Vietnamese.
Yeah, like for me, that makes perfectly sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, those chefs are your like finer dining Vietnamese restaurants, right? And then 29 restaurants, the Bib Commands,
Yeah,
are all Vietnamese.
nice.
It was, you know, less than 10% is international. And then you have your Michelin Select, which are almost all kind of international. So what I'm trying to say is that what it signaled to the country was, hey, you know what? If you do Vietnamese cuisine or you have some kind of modern Vietnamese, you can get a star or you can get recognized. So I think what happened after that was a lot more of these Vietnamese openings because they realized that, you know, to be competitive or maybe to get international recognition, there was an interest in modern Vietnamese from, you know, the foodie, the international culinary world for recognitions. Even 50 Best, the only Vietnamese restaurant or the Vietnamese bars that are on it are also like modern Vietnamese places. So what you see now is a lot of these modern Vietnamese restaurants opening,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, because it's now like a marketing angle maybe for some. And even some restaurants that were not modern Vietnamese or didn't try to say that in the past, all of a sudden started, you know, being a little bit more Vietnamese.
Okay, I've seen like in many places in the world, this has happened over and over again. That happened here in the
Yeah.
Basque Country. It has happened in many Latin American cities. It has happened in Copenhagen. In many cities, like the dominant player in fine dining restaurant was French. And many of the chefs that after this reinvented their local cuisines were working at French restaurants or maybe even started a French restaurant that evolved into a local cuisine restaurant. I've seen this happening over and over again and in different regions and moments in history. Is there like I don't know, like key chefs you could mention that are worth like visiting or reading their work or checking out?
So one of the chefs in the restaurants, I would say he's like the most famous Vietnamese chef in Vietnam. His name is Chef Peter from Annan, Saigon. So he is the only 1-star restaurant in Ho Chi Minh City.
Is it?
The only one with a star here. He's also the only chef on the 50 best list.
Okay.
So his restaurant does modern Vietnamese cuisine. And he is known as the chef who is really championing Vietnamese cuisine and modern Vietnamese cuisine overseas and in Vietnam. So he himself is also very much like an ambassador in the international culinary world. So I think we're all very grateful for that because, you know, it sets like a role model and what he's done with his restaurant, very impressive. And then in Hanoi, you have your other 1-star, which is a chef called Sam Tran. So Chef
Okay.
Sam Tran comes from Gia Hanoi, Gia, but in Vietnamese, it's called Zia with a Z.
Okay.
And she is a Vietnamese chef, first and foremost, also female Vietnamese female chef. So, you know, big deal in Vietnam, to be very honest. And comes from Hanoi, but she trained in Australia at some of the hat, you know, like they have the hats, right, in Australia instead of the stars.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And she does a really beautiful like Vietnamese cuisine. She's now representing, you know, Vietnam, going overseas to do like Michelin awards and events and stuff. So these 2 people, I think, have really stepped out of Vietnam and gone overseas as culinary ambassadors. But honestly, very much in the last few years as well.
We've talked a lot about Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon and Hanoi.
Yeah.
Are these the 2 food capitals? Are there any other like relevant places when it comes to food worth visiting?
So these 2 places are like, you know, so Hanoi is the capital of Vietnam.
Is it?
And then Saigon's kind of like your business hub. So you've got like, you know, your Washington, D.C. and New York, right? You know,
Okay.
that kind of relationship,
Yeah.
like Tokyo and Kyoto kind of thing.
Is it?
So naturally, I think because there's a lot more business and stuff like that and happenings, even the locals also all go to these 2 places for work. So by naturally, having more people and more travelers and tourists, the food scene is a lot more lively. But recently, I would say starting this year, with more tourism in the different cities like Hoi An and Da Nang and even Nha Trang and Phu Quoc, when the tourists are interested in places like that, the hotels come in. And then they are the ones who bring in good dining concepts and good chefs, right? So, for example, Nha Trang, which is a beach destination, recently opened up a hotel, Milia Nha Trang, right? And international hotels that go there. And they brought in a new restaurant called Hispania, which used to be owned by a one-star chef from Spain who's now doing Spanish cuisine in Nha Trang, which is,
Okay.
what? Right? So they're like suddenly, because Vietnam as a tourism destination is just becoming more popular, you see things happening. Yeah. And perhaps at first they will cater a lot more to the tourists, but I do foresee that in due time, locals will also just in general be able to dine more and enjoy more in each smaller city.
You get to see that also here in Spain. There are like cities that are very well known for their food, but it's also interesting finding like something super interesting in a remote village or like a small city or these kind of things. I think it has its own magic.
Yeah. And now you can, like back in the day, there used to be nothing, but now I hear, like, I can hear it be like, oh yeah, and this like sleepy beach resort 3 hours away, there's like now this French chef there doing things. And I was like, whoa, what?
I also wanted to ask you about coffee. I understand that coffee is like a big deal in Vietnam and it's one of the main producers worldwide. What's the deal about coffee?
So Vietnam is actually one of the top 5 countries that produces coffee and the number 1 producer of Robusta coffee. I think number 1 or number 2. I think the other one might be Brazil.
Brazil is number 1, I think also producer in general. Yeah. I think so. But I don't know the ranking, to be honest. I know just that Vietnam is among the first ones.
Yeah. So Vietnam is one of the largest producers of coffee in the world and potentially the largest coffee producer of the Robusta coffee bean. And it's a huge coffee and cafe culture.
Is it more like a coffee drinking country than a tea drinking country? Because that's very unusual in Asia.
No, in Asia, I definitely believe it's one of the higher coffee consuming countries, right? For the reason that this is a French influence thing. I think the coffee drinking thing is a very French influence thing.
Like the baguette, of course.
Yeah, it's a very, very like French culture because even the way they drink the coffee is very relaxed.
Is it?
A lot of Vietnamese people can just sit by the streets and then wait for the coffee to drip for like an hour.
Okay.
It's very like midday siesta, not siesta, like a midday coffee kind of like slow down.
That's it.
Whereas, I come from Singapore and when I was living in Malaysia, you drink this coffee pretty fast. We never have to wait for the coffee, right? It's a very different kind of way that we drink coffee, I personally feel, but I enjoy the one in Vietnam a lot more. Yeah, but on your note, people here also drink a lot of tea.
Okay, I'm a big tea drinker. That's also what I'm asking. Like, I love tea,
but not in the way that we drink tea in Southeast Asia or from China, right?
Okay,
they drink tea. And it's very standard to go to any street place and order chada, which is basically iced tea. And it tastes like water.
Okay, like super diluted.
Yeah, it's just like a cup with a massive ice and then tea. And it tastes like water. It's not hot. It's really just to cool down. It's like a standard drink. Anywhere you sit down, you'll be like, hi chada, like 2 chada. You sit down and you drink it.
Okay, that's interesting because if people would ask me about what do you know about Vietnamese drinks, I would say lemonade. because every time I went to Vietnamese restaurants, I would have lemonade, and they were like nice and different and with herbs. And the one I had in Singapore in Miss Saigon, it had a bit of salt, and I was like really like, wow, this is nice, like a lemonade with a pinch of salt. Like, what's the deal with lemonade and this kind of refreshing drinks? Are there any more besides lemonade and iced tea, or are
Yeah, of course.
okay?
There's so many. So, like in Vietnam, like, salted lemon is such a popular thing in some of the restaurants and, like, local places. You see salted lemon with like Coca-Cola, salted lemon with like, lime, and it's fizzy and it's ice because it's really hot in Vietnam, right? So you got to drink like cool drinks like that. And I think that's the reason why also like Vietnam is really home to a lot of very innovative beverages.
And what about spirits and alcoholic beverage? What's the national drink?
The national drink, meaning...
I mean, like the thing people drink the most. I assume beer, but like
there's
in
a lot
terms
of
of
beer.
spirits, of liquors, is there like something equivalent to sake or something?
They call it like roux, which is like a rice wine.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like the local moonshine, right? Like it's, the local, like, if they're not drinking beer on the streets, they're probably going to drink roux, which is the local,
Yeah, the easy to go drink. Yeah.
I don't know whether it's as like perhaps premium as sake. It's really like a moonshine.
I mean, like, these kind of things, I've seen them also, like, getting revalorized. Like, here in the Basque Country, there's a very specific type of apple cider, hard cider.
Yeah.
And today, this is something, every time I give food tours, I include it on the tour, and people love it. Also, when I talk with Basque friends, they tell me that 30 years ago, that this was something like just all drunk people would drink. Like, it was really, like denigrated, not taken seriously. And now it's interesting because cider houses, they're also innovating and creating new types of drinks, like applying ice wine techniques into apples, or making apple liquors, or different things around this local varieties of apples, which is also super interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation with spirits. A lot of people are making it modern. So we also do have like modern versions of rice wine or different versions of like liqueurs. Quite similar, I think, it was what's happening.
And also later I got to understand, yes, of course, because every time I would go to Vietnamese restaurants, I would see that they had like this kind of roasted ducks. And for me, this was like, but I feel that that's more Chinese, that like it didn't feel like something local. And actually, I guess it comes like baguette from China. It was Vietnamese-sized. But it's also a big deal, right? Like the dishes around duck.
Roasted duck.
Or duck in general.
I think there are some duck dishes, but I'm not. It's not as popular as I think like chicken and beef and even pork. There are duck dishes though, but not like on a day-to-day basis. Not as popular.
Okay, no, that's interesting because also, and I know this because I myself have worked in Spanish restaurants in Germany. And I know that you have to adapt things to the local audience, and sometimes you have to make things that Spanish people would say, I've never seen that in Spain. Like, but for the German audience, it would make sense. And I guess this was also something like that, probably.
Yeah, it's probably like that. I think there, like what I said, I think like, Vietnam is really interesting in a sense that like different parts of Vietnam have greater accessibility to different animals, right? Like in Ho Chi Minh City, you'll see restaurants that are like, we specialize in cuisine from Hue, we specialize in cuisine from the Mekong Delta, and we specialize in cuisine from Hoi An. And every single restaurant, even though it's all Vietnamese food, is actually super, super different.
I can imagine for sure.
So, for example, if it's the Mekong Delta, maybe you'll see a lot more dishes with duck.
That's it.
And then if you see like, food from perhaps like, nearer to the sea, it's a lot more seafood. So to say that, Vietnamese cuisine has a lot of duck, it's a yes answer, but also not really a yes answer. Like in Ho Chi Minh City, we don't see a lot of ducks around. in general, right? So I think it really, really depends as well.
Okay. And my last questions would be about, because this is something I have to admit, I haven't had anything memorable or like outstanding, but what about desserts? What's the dessert culture in Vietnam in general?
So one of the very, very popular desserts in Vietnam is something called chè. And the best way to describe it is a sweet soup.
Okay, that's
It's like
interesting.
a sweet, like a condensed milk. There's a lot of condensed, like people love sweet stuff in Vietnam, okay? Especially in the South in Ho Chi Minh City. So the desserts are always kind of like condensed milk size, like condensed milk size. And chè is, there's many different types of chè. There's maybe like a durian chè, which comes with like durian and then, like a little bit of condensed milk and ice.
Okay. Like,
Yeah.
like a super. This actually reminds me of some kinds of desserts that you find in Venezuela, in my home country.
Really? That's really interesting.
Because it's also very hot. So there are these desserts that are like ice
Exactly.
shapes with like condensed milk syrup and some fruit, also syrup, something like that.
Yeah, I think you kind of, that like if you have access to fruits and it's a hot country, it almost seems like the natural recipe for it.
Yeah, like common sense, of course.
Yeah, in Vietnam, though, we don't do shaved ice. In Singapore and Malaysia, we do shaved ice. In Vietnam, it's just an ice cube and then, just all together. And that's how you eat it. It's just like a bowl with ice, condensed milk, some water, and then some fruits. And it's amazing. There's some, like nowadays, if you're maybe more in the city, you have like certain jelly and toppings as well, just for the younger kids to appeal to them. But you can make chè from everything and anything. Like I love one that has like an avocado pudding with like avocado ice cream with
Nice.
a bunch of stuff. So yeah, you can have mango chè, you can have anything.
That's it for this week's episode of Potluck Food Talks. If you like what we're doing, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok as Potluck Food Talks. The show airs every Monday.